That night, my wife Denise was heading out for her night shift job as a dispatcher at the city taxi service, Finley. Before departing, Denise gave me a good-night kiss and left. The next morning, I drove from our house to the nearby gas station, intending to buy her favorite cappuccino with vanilla syrup and deliver it to her workplace. Upon entering the dispatch room, Joyce Tillman was seated at the desk. She looked up at me in surprise and inquired, "Wade, how are you doing?" I stood there holding the coffee, perplexed since I felt fine, wasn't ill, and didn't know why she asked. Responding with confusion, I informed her that I was okay, but I questioned why she asked and where Denise was. Joyce looked at me over her glasses. "Denise wasn't here for the night shift, as she said you were sick." I placed the coffee cups gently on the edge of her desk, not comprehending anything. Joyce readjusted her headset as she fixed her gaze on the monitor. A brief stillness enveloped the dispatch room before it was disrupted by an influx of phone calls. Stepping outside, I inhaled the crisp morning air and dialed Denise's number. The call went unanswered, however, for reasons unknown. In the parking lot, her silver sedan could be seen in a distant corner. As I approached, I peered through the side window into the car to find Denise's sunglasses on the front seat and a charging cord protruding from the dashboard. The vehicle was secured, its engine cold, suggesting she hadn't ventured out during the night. I retraced my steps back into the office, where Joyce handled one call after another, speaking through her headset microphone while marking locations on the city map and attempting to avoid eye contact. Standing patiently at the edge of her desk, I waited for a pause in the calls. At last, she concluded that encounter. I held my breath and questioned, "Yet Denise's car is parked in the lot. How did she depart then?" Joyce recoiled, readjusted her spectacles, and gazed at me. Her expression clearly signaled a reluctance to engage. She hesitated for some moments before uttering, "Well, Wade, she left last night around 10 o'clock. I believe she took one of our cabs. Let me verify." Her fingers danced swiftly over the keyboard. I stood there seemingly detached from reality, watching her screen. Her fingers deftly tapped the keys. She soon found what she sought. Ben Miller was her ride. Immediately, she contacted Ben via the internal line and spoke into the microphone. "Ben, this is Wade Hayes, Denise's husband. You drove Denise from the office last night. Where did you drop her off?" There was a brief pause. As Russell often does, she confirmed she had been set down at the turn toward the houses. The words etched themselves into my memory, leaving me disoriented yet again. This wasn't a new occurrence. As I struggled to process what I'd been told, Joyce moved back to her screen, signaling the end of our chat. I climbed into my car and headed to work. All day long, just one phrase echoed in my mind. "To Russell's point, like always." I barely managed to finish my shift, then closed my laptop and drove home. Denise had awoken from her night shift, giving no indication that anything was amiss. She prepared dinner and asked about my day. "Fine," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Just another ordinary day." I was about to pose a question of my own, but Denise suddenly let out a deep sigh and mentioned that her friend Chloe had quarreled with her husband during the night and fled. Denise needed to soothe her at such an hour. Forcing a smile, I nodded in understanding. It seemed Joyce had alerted Denise about my visit. Without the taxi driver's warning, I would have accepted her story without hesitation. There was no need to probe further. She only stood to deepen her woven deception. I required tangible evidence to confirm my suspicions. The following 2 days, as my wife prepared for her night shift, became a trial of endurance. I found myself scrutinizing her actions, seeking any hint in her behavior. As usual, she kissed me goodnight, wished me well, and left for work. I waited 20 minutes before driving to Finley's office. I parked in a deserted alleyway opposite the road and waited. Time seemed interminable. Around midnight, Denise emerged from the office. She approached a taxi, slid into the back seat swiftly. I trailed them. Approximately 20 minutes later, the taxi reduced its speed at a quiet bend leading to a small hamlet. Denise alighted, slammed the door shut, and the car reversed direction toward the city. Driving a bit more, I parked on the side of the road beneath heavy tree cover, switched off the engine, and set out after her. Denise walked briskly with purpose. Eventually, the path led her to a small, 2-story house perched at the water's edge. A soft glow emanated from the ground floor windows. Denise ascended the porch, extracted a key from her purse with ease, unlocked the door, and entered. I returned to my car, fetched my tablet, and searched an image of the house on Google. The residence was owned by Martin Calder, aged 80. I leaned back in my seat, scrutinizing the screen. What was my wife doing at this hour in this elderly man's dwelling? Romance didn't even enter my thoughts. The vast age gap eliminated any possibility of an affair. Instead, my suspicions turned towards financial issues, concealed debts, or some other predicament Denise had found herself in. That night I drove back home, and the following day I returned to Russell's Point. The town appeared abandoned. I pulled my vehicle into the entrance, spending roughly an hour loitering near Calder's residence, feigning interest in the environment and seeking residence. By a neighbor's dock, I spotted an elderly man fiddling with a boat engine. Approaching him, I initiated conversation about the area, gradually guiding the discussion towards Calder's house. "Martin seldom visits," the neighbor revealed. "He resides in Columbus with his wife. His son-in-law Curtis takes care of the house." Hearing this name, Curtis Mallory, sent a chill down my spine and made every minor detail align. Curtis Mallory, my wife's supervisor, lived less than an hour away from work, an ideal hidden venue for clandestine meetings. Upon returning home, I booted up my computer and commenced searching for information about Curtis. Until that night, he had merely been my wife's boss in my mind. Our paths had crossed a few times at festive gatherings, but he never crossed my thoughts again. Now I desired to comprehend his true nature. To my surprise, there was an abundance of information about him. Curtis willingly granted interviews for local newspapers, participated in charity functions, and often attended various city events. In pictures, he always appeared cheerful, shaking hands with officials and speaking to reporters about his business expansion. From one article, I discovered that he co-owned the taxi service Finley with his wife, Rhonda Mallory. Leaning back in my chair, I contemplated this newfound knowledge. If indeed he was using the family home for illicit liaisons, the repercussions for him could extend beyond a typical familial scandal. 3 days later, during Denise's night shift, she kissed me goodbye, wished me pleasant dreams, and departed. As soon as the door shut, I drove to Russell's Point. By 11 in the evening, I found myself parked on the dark shoulder near the lakeside house. Complete quiet enveloped everything. Occasionally, the sound of water and wind through trees echoed. Time seemed to crawl at a snail's pace. Eventually, points of light appeared from afar. A large black vehicle glided onto the driveway. It was Mallory's car. It parked in the garage and vanished behind the closing doors. Almost an hour went by with no one emerging, and then a taxi arrived at the house. My heart seemed ready to burst. The back door opened, and out stepped Denise. Until that very moment, I had harbored a flicker of hope that it wouldn't be my wife stepping out. I aimed the camera at the porch and pressed record. She swiftly ascended the steps of the house and vanished behind the oak doors. At that instant, the last of my doubts dissipated. I halted the recording. The screen blanked, mirroring my face, and in that moment, a weight seemed to lift within me. The burden of anxiety, anticipation, and crushing agony that had plagued me for several days dissipated. I slipped my phone into my jacket pocket, ignited the engine, and slowly eased out. I returned home around dawn. I lay down in bed, closed my eyes, and absorbed the quietude. I was already familiar with Martin Calder's residence, and I knew that what I intended to deliver to him would amount to a punishment for his son-in-law. As daylight broke, Denise returned from work and headed straight to bed. I stealthily exited our home. Columbus lay an hour and a half away. Martin Calder resided in a tranquil, well-maintained suburb. His house was a solid brick structure nestled amidst a neatly trimmed lawn. I parked alongside the curb, ascended the steps, and pressed the doorbell. Footsteps echoed from within, leisurely paced. The door was opened by a tall, fit man with sleek gray hair meticulously groomed and an alert gaze. He regarded me with surprise. "Are you Martin Calder?" I inquired evenly. "I am Wade Hayes." "There's a critical issue I need to share with you." Martin subtly narrowed his eyes, and an underlying tension appeared. He stepped aside silently, inviting me into the expansive foyer. I was there to disclose the facts. I spoke as calmly as before. "My spouse, Denise, works as a dispatcher for the taxi service called Finley. She usually works night shifts. However, on one particular morning, I couldn't find her at work. It turned out that during her night shifts, she had been visiting your residence in Russell's Point. I believe you can now deduce what I discovered." I took out my phone and played the night video recording. On the footage, Mallory's black car could be seen entering the garage, followed by Denise heading towards the house an hour later. Calder watched the screen without blinking, replaying it multiple times in search of another explanation. An oppressive silence filled the foyer. "If you remain skeptical, you can verify everything yourself," I suggested. I politely nodded to the householder and stepped outside. then returned home to find Denise in the kitchen sipping coffee and idly browsing her phone. I inquired about her night's rest before ascending the stairs. This particular day had long been anticipated by me, and now it had finally arrived. Sometime around 5 in the morning, the front door echoed loudly downstairs. I glanced at the clock on my bedside table, noticing that Denise was home more than 3 hours earlier than her usual time. The house was unusually quiet. There were no familiar sounds emanating from downstairs, nor any signs of Denise making tea or turning on the living room light. Complete silence reigned. I arose, donned my robe, and descended the stairs to find Denise seated at the kitchen table, her fingers tightly clenched, staring intently at one spot. Her expression suggested that something had transpired unexpectedly, as she hadn't anticipated it at all. "You're early," I remarked as I entered the room. "Is everything all right?" She winced at my words, gradually lifting her head to respond in a weak voice. "You terminated Wade. Either the company is shutting down or reorganizing. I don't comprehend." "Is that true?" I filled a glass with cold water. "And why did Curtis decide to reduce staff?" Denise evaded my gaze, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her coat. She remained silent, evidently struggling with what falsehood to concoct this time. I sipped my water and faced my wife. "You don't need to invent anything, Denise. It wasn't Curtis who dismissed you. It was his spouse." Slowly, she raised her eyes to me. "Since Rhonda uncovered the truth during our rendezvous at her father-in-law's house in Russell's Point," I continued. "Did you believe no one would ever discover?" Then I retrieved my phone and played the recording. Denise stiffened. She stared at me as if she had encountered a specter. Subsequently, she lowered her gaze to the phone. Denise gasped for breath as if she was running out of air. Eventually, realizing there was no point in denying it, she began to speak. She asked me for forgiveness, attempting to clarify that their initial relationship with Curtis had been purely professional. He assisted and encouraged her, but boundaries were overstepped. There was a momentary pause, anticipating some response from me, yet I remained silent. It became apparent to me that salvaging our marriage was no longer an option due to the erosion of trust. A few days hence, I consulted a lawyer and initiated divorce proceedings. The dissolution of Curtis and Rhonda's marriage stretched on for months, morphing into a subdued, acrimonious battle over every penny. Legally, Curtis still held co-ownership in the taxi service, Findlay, so he couldn't be easily dismissed. Rhonda enlisted top-tier lawyers in the city and froze all operational accounts, demanding absolute protection of her share. Each move Curtis made within the office was now scrutinized by lawyers. Martin Calder didn't shy away from involvement and leveraged his connections. He made it known to his son-in-law. Should he push for excessive compensation, he would confront him with past due debts and loans that Curtis had borrowed from him to expand their business. Ultimately, Curtis was compelled to concede or risk losing everything. After our divorce, Denise opted to begin anew in a different state, and we never crossed paths again. Occasionally in the supermarket parking lot, I spot vehicles bearing the Findlay emblem, which triggers memories of this sorrowful narrative. Isn't it intriguing? What other choices could the husband have made in such circumstances? Stay tuned for more unexpected tales ahead.